Hello, everyone, and welcome to our virtual tour live from Lindisfarne. My name is Ginny, and I'm a community archaeologist with DigVentures. DigVentures are a team of archaeologists on a mission to make it possible for people to partake in archaeology, whether that be online like today or in the field like all our crowdfunders who are here at Lindisfarne with us. So if you're joining us, you'll know that we're digging at Lindisfarne today, and we're on a mission to uncover evidence of the early medieval monastery that's on this island up here in the North Sea. Over the past 2 weeks, we found some incredible archaeology. I don't want to spoil too much yet, but we're going to show you some of our best discoveries today and take you through it all. And we really, really can't wait to show some of those off for you. I am joined by a special guest today. I'll have him introduce himself later. But just before we get going, I wanted to say that this event and the dig itself has been made possible by our subscribers and our crowdfunders who are joining us live today to speak with us and to ask any questions. So if you're watching back the recording and you fancy joining us live at our next event, you can become a subscriber. Not only will you get the chance to join us live for these events, but you'll also be supporting the work that we do, and you'll get access to all of our online courses, so you'll be able to explore more archaeology from home. If you're interested in finding out more, you can head to our website. I will also add as well, just before we get going, there are going to be human remains featured in this tour. Any human remains that are on site or in situ have been covered, both to protect them from the elements and out of respect due to the public-facing nature of this site. But just be warned, in the finds room especially, there will be some human remains visible. So if you're not comfortable with that, feel free to tune out now. And without further ado, let me say hello to our special guest that we've got joining us today.
Hello, Ginny. I'm Dr. David Petts, and I'm a member of the academic staff at Durham University, Department of Archaeology, and I just love early medieval monasteries.
That's always a good start on a site like this. So speaking of Lindisfarne, David, why don't you tell us a little bit about why we decided to dig here? What's so important about Lindisfarne itself?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Lindisfarne was one of the most important monasteries in early medieval Britain. So we're talking in the 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th centuries. It was an amazing centre for religion, but also produced some amazing works of art. So things like the Lindisfarne Gospels, the kind of masterpiece of early medieval artistic output, was produced here on the island.
Fantastic. And speaking of that sort of history that we've got here, could you summarize a little bit for us the history of the monastery that we're looking for?
Yeah, the monastery was founded in the year 635 by the Northumbrian King Oswald, and he brought over monks from the Scottish monastery at Iona to set up his new monastery as he came in as King of Northumbria. And over the years, it became increasingly powerful. It became increasingly a centre for religion, but also for exchange and for trade. It was a big population centre, and it's probably all these things that led to it being one of the first places to be attacked by Vikings. This is one of the key things everyone knows about Lindisfarne. In 793, it was almost the first place to be attacked by Vikings in Britain, and it kind of opened the door for the Viking Age. And then we're currently kind of rethinking some of the aspects of the history of the monastery, but it's clear that the monastery kept on being active all the way through until the Norman period, when the monastery is kind of reconstructed and reworked, and that later monastery survives all the way till the 16th century.
Fab. So there's a really sort of rich history there, but how is that history reflected in the archaeological record? Is there anything specifically that we're targeting or looking for? What sort of inspired us to try and find this monastery that was famous for the Viking attacks?
Well, surprisingly, despite its importance, Lindisfarne hasn't actually seen that much archaeological work in the past, certainly not on the early medieval monastery. And that was always our aim. We started 9 years ago. And as always, we started off by doing things like a geophysical survey. And through a bit of research, we narrowed down where we were going to excavate. And over those last 9 years, we found the main thing we found is a very large cemetery, but we've also got buildings, we've got ditches, we've got all sorts of things. And this would have been a really, really large site. The extent of the monastery would have gone from the southern side of the island all the way to the northern edge of the village. So most of what we're looking at actually lies under the modern village.
Yeah, and just for context for everyone there, you can see on the screen here, this is just a little piece of that geophysics survey that was done all those years ago, and you can see sort of where our initial trenches were there. Is there anything in particular on there, David, that you can point out for us that's of interest?
I mean, you can see all sorts of things on there. The most obvious thing is the cloister. So in the kind of middle of the picture, we've got a kind of square shape in the field, and that's actually from the later monastery. But it's a second cloister to that later monastery, which is a bit of a surprise. But more generally, you can just see lots and lots of activity. There's all sorts of pits and ditches and features. And whilst geophysics is brilliant at telling us that there are things underneath the soil, it takes excavation to actually work out precisely what they are and to date them. So that's why the geophysics is the first step, but the excavation has been the key thing we've been doing to understand what we see there on the screen.
Of course, yeah. And speaking of these excavations, before we sort of head into what we're looking at this year in particular, could you maybe take us through some of the highlights of things that we found sort of over the past 9 years? Because it's been a very long project and there's been a lot that's come out.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we can break it down into features. So the big thing we have is our very large cemetery, which more or less covers the whole field we see there on that geophysical survey. And we've got buildings as well, but also we've got some nice objects. So we've had some. Probably the best known nice object we've had is our wonderful glass playing piece. And rather pleasingly, we can see on the right there, we found a fragment of another one this year, and you can see they're almost identical. We've also found evidence for sculpture. We found lots of animal bone, lots of human bone. So there's a huge amount of kind of potential of this site. And obviously, when we get out of the field and back into the labs, there's a lot of research we still need to do on this stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. I can't wait to see what comes out of that research that we've got planned for sort of the next phase of the project. But sort of bringing it round to this year, I don't want to spoil too much because, as I said, we're going to go take a look for ourselves. But could you maybe talk us over sort of the targets that we chose for this year and what we wanted to see from this year's excavations?
Yeah, I mean, we had two big research questions this year. First of all, we were just trying to find out how big the cemetery is, because in previous years, more or less everywhere we'd opened a small trench, we'd found evidence for cemetery, we couldn't find the edge. So this year we opened yet more small trenches to try and just find how many people are in there and how wide the cemetery goes. So that's kind of underpinned one of our research questions. But also we've got other features. We've got a large early ditch, which is probably part of the early phase of the monastery. I think you'll see that on the site tour. And one of the things we're trying to do is pick up its course in other trenches. It appears in our main trench, but we put a couple of trenches to the north and south to see whether we could see that. So they're probably our main research questions, but we're always interested in what objects we find, recovering the skeletal remains, looking at the animal bone. And as every year, there's always going to be surprises which we hadn't planned on.
Of course, yeah, and they're always sort of the best things when you get those surprising finds that come through. But are you quite happy with how things are going this year? Are you excited to see what's going on?
Yeah, it's been a wonderful year as ever. We've been lucky with the weather, so we've been able to get lots of work done. We've had great bunch of people on site. So really, for us, it's been another successful year. We've answered some of our research questions. We've got new ones for next year. We've made some nice site discoveries, but there's a lot for us to still think about. And you can see on the drone video there that some of our new trenches we've opened up, and you never quite know what you're going to find when you open up a new trench. But I think without spoiling the trench tour, I think the key thing is we have lots more archaeology coming through.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, David, for that sort of brief summary. So we are going to hear more from David. David's going to be around for our Q&A towards the end. So for anyone live, our subscribers and our crowdfunders, you will be able to ask David anything you like about the archaeology, the history, and the wider project itself as well. But in the meantime, like David said, we've got some videos to show you with some really exciting highlights from the things that we found this year. So to start off, we're going to head to Ben, who has been out on site, and he's going to show us around the trenches. We're going to see some of those features like the ditch that David mentioned and see some excavation in action. And then once we're done, I'll pass us over to Freddie, who's in the finds room, so we can see the next step. But without further ado, let's hand over virtually to Ben, who's going to show us around this year's trenches.
Welcome to our 2024 excavations on Lindisfarne. And we're going to take you through a quick tour of the trenches, starting in Trench 2, our biggest trench. And this trench has been running for about 9 years now. We started this trench in the first year and we're still going 9 years later. And that's because of all the exciting archaeology that we have here, and we're still excavating it. So I think I'll take you through a little bit of a story of the trench, starting from the earliest features and working our way through time towards the later features as well. So the earliest feature that we came across in site, we actually started to discover a couple of years ago, and that is this very, very large ditch that we have in here. We think this is possibly the original monastic vallum ditch, that boundary that would have enclosed the monastery itself. It's really deep. We've got about 2 meters worth of depth, and it's around about 4 meters wide as well. We had carbon dates that put this to the earliest phases of the monastery that we know about from the records, but it doesn't seem to have lasted very long, because as you look across the trench you can see that it's filled in, and we have these later structural remains sitting along the top, and you can just about get a perspective of how they are sinking down. These walls are sort of sinking down slightly into the top of the ditch, and that is because that softer soil of the ditch that has been filled in has been pushed down by the weight of these structures and making them sink down slightly. But the fact that they are all overlying this ditch is telling us that this must be the earliest feature that we have discovered so far, which is very exciting. Gives us that insight into the early days of the monastery. So yeah, let's take a look at some of the structural remains. As we move over this direction, we can start to see the outlines of some walls and some stone-built features. For example, here we have a stone-lined box. Originally, when we first exposed this, we thought it might be a stone-lined burial, but when we excavated the fill-out, there was no bones. So we're not 100% sure exactly what its function was, but it appears not to have been for burial. Perhaps it was some sort of water storage, small tank, something like that, trough maybe. It also seems to be enclosed by the walls of a building. So we have this L-shaped corner here, and the return of it just where Alex and Layla are coming up behind us as well. So we've got the remains of the wall of a building and this stone-lined box inside of it. Then, just behind that, we have a really lovely stone-lined drain that you can see just in here. Again, dipping down at quite an angle. Alongside this slab as well, everything is sinking down into the top of that earlier ditch feature. This drain runs from just behind Alex all the way through the trench pretty much, just to where Linda and Daisy are, where it is starting to be cut away by later archaeological features, such as burials in the lime kiln, and that's why it's a little bit more higgledy-piggledy up here. In terms of what it was used for, it would be water management of some sort, but we don't know exactly where it's coming from or going to. We just don't have it surviving beyond the edges of the trench. But for whatever reason, they have needed water management in this location. Just next to it, we have this huge, great big stone slab, and a slightly smaller, though still quite big one next to it as well. We think that is possibly some sort of original level walking surface, entranceway perhaps, into some of these buildings that we have here. But the curious thing is just how busy this cemetery that we've had here, which we'll talk about a bit later, has been, because the burials have been hacked through these massive stone features. So there's a whole edge of that slab missing there where a burial was. Similarly here, this wall has been hacked out where they've put another burial in. So they're going to a lot of effort to excavate graves. It's implying to us that this was a very heavily used cemetery over time. Talking of the burials, we've had even more this year. So every year we have many burials that we have to excavate as part of our research, answering our research questions. And we've had a similar story again this year. We've had lots and lots of human remains, burials in the entirety of the trench, some of which we are more interesting than others, and we'll talk about that when we get further towards the south end of the trench. But moving along over here, we get another perspective of some of these huge chunky walls that we have in our trench. Really wide. So we have one face of a wall here where these big stones are, and the other side, the other face, is all the way back here. So really wide, really substantial walls, again cut away, dug away by later burials and other features as well. So we only have small segments of them left. It's a very interesting thing that the walls themselves don't overlie or cut any burials. It's the burials that overlie and cut through these walls, which tells us that the buildings, the structures, must all be earlier than the cemeteries, which is coming later on. As we move over here, we see another example of some of these huge, great big walls that we've been talking about. This one on a different alignment and made of a slightly different construction material here. But also, similarly, dipping down at quite an angle. That's because we are currently excavating a brand new portion of our ditch just here. Freshly exposed this year. We want to get more evidence, datable material out of it that can confirm our previous dates from our excavations last year around when this early medieval boundary ditch for the monastery was created. So, as we move towards the south end of our trench, start talking a little bit about some of our burials in some more detail. In just here, we had a very exciting burial came up about a week or so ago. We think we have what we call a pseudo boat burial. So what that means is we've had an individual buried with parts of a boat or a ship. We know that because we have these surviving clench bolts, over 30 of them we found. So the wood itself hasn't survived, but we have those iron clench bolts, which look like rivets with these diamond-shaped rows on them. 30 or so of them discovered in this burial in particular. So we've recorded exactly where they all were, all their orientation, so that we can build up an idea of perhaps how and what parts of the boat was buried with this individual. But speaking of how heavily used this cemetery was, we found even more bones directly below and to the side as well. And that's kind of the story all across the site this year. Just next to it we had another burial, and just next to that we had, we think, possibly a parent and child burial buried right next to each other, which again is showing us that story of the cemetery being used by everyday folk, not just the monks of the monastery. And then as we move to just behind this interesting area of burials, and we move into our metalworking area, another one of our really important and interesting features on the site. We discovered this a few years ago, but we weren't entirely sure what it was until last year, where we discovered the in situ burnt remains of the edge of a pit, and that was filled with copper waste debris, droplets and bits of metalworking slag. So this year we've come back to this area to fully excavate and record it, so that we can get as much of that useful archaeological material, so that we can send it to specialists and they can tell us all about what they were actually making here. But the story of the burials returns, because actually it was cut through by, I think, 4 burials we had in here. They were excavated last year, and they had truncated through, removed parts of our metalworking pit. So we were only left with just the outer edges of the burnt pit itself. In almost like it looks like a figure of 8 shape it would have been, so perhaps 2 little pits next to each other, one of which may have been a flue where they were heating the fire to heat up the metal. But it's been a really good achievement to finally finish off this area this year. I think we've been wondering about what it is for the last sort of 5 or 6 seasons, but now we've fully answered that question. So let's talk about some of the finds that we've had entrenched to some of the excitement that we've had this year. So we had a pretty exciting day a few days ago when we've discovered something that you might see later on in the finds room, just in this location here. So I won't spoil the surprise for now, but later on we'll see more about that. And also we've had a few more coins, and we'll see them later on in the finds room. But let's move over now to trench number 9. So we are back in Sanctuary Close, our main excavation area, and we have 3 new trenches open in addition to trench 2 this year. We have trench 9 that we're just on our way towards, and we have 2 smaller trenches, 10 and 11, at either end of the field as well. And what we are looking to understand is questions like, what is the extent of the cemetery? And what are some of our geophysical anomalies that we have found from the survey that was done probably about 10 years or so ago now. Trench 9 is quite a long, thin trench, and trenches 10 and 11 were small ones. Trench 11 has located, we think, more of our ditch feature, and trench 10 at the corner has come across more burials. So we are yet to find that full extent of the graveyard here, which is starting to confirm our hypothesis that actually they are utilising pretty much all of the land in this part of the island as a cemetery. So we are just coming up on trench 9 now, and I'll talk you through what we found here. So we have our crew working away, finishing off the last of our digging, ready for recording. So just in this corner of the trench here, you should be able to see we've got some stone remains in here, possible remains of a box-shaped feature. Again, no burial in it though, so we're not entirely sure was there a burial here that has since been removed or not, or is it something completely different, not burial related at all. However, we did find one of our really nice namestones in this location a couple of weeks or so ago. So I'm sure there would have been more burials in here that we just don't survive with us right now. In the middle of the trench, we have been excavating down through a sequence of burials, hoping to find that ditch again underneath. So we expect it to continue along in a pretty straight line, but we need to prove that by locating it in this position here, if that is the case. So one of our questions that remains before the end of the dig is, can we find it in this location here? Main story of the trench is yet more burials under all of these tarps. We've had a lot of human remains, some of which are still being excavated as well. And I think just in this location here was where one of our other namestones was found, slightly smaller than usual, but much more deeply incised with some more detail, which is really lovely to see, and I'm sure you'll be able to see that in the finds room later as well. And then as we come to the western end of the trench, you should be able to see we've got a wall coming through. This was something that was also targeted on our geophysics, but we weren't entirely sure what this feature was until we excavated the trench. Seems to be quite a long wall. We don't have any returns or angles on it yet. And at this point, it could be one of our early medieval walls that we've also had in Trench 2, but ideally we'd be looking for datable material to come out of it before we could confirm or deny that hypothesis. So we're going to be returning to this trench, we think, next year, so that we can continue working down, getting datable material for the wall, and hopefully locating our ditch as well. So that is a mini trench tour of our excavations here at Lindisfarne in 2024. I hope you've all very much enjoyed seeing what we've found, seeing our trenches, and I believe you'll be heading off to the finds room now and seeing what they found over there. So thank you very much to all of our venturers, our supporters who have been following us online and supporting the dig. Crowdfunding it's all really super important and allows all of this archaeology to happen. So thank you again, and I shall see you another day.
There we go. So it was wonderful to hear from Ben and to see the trenches in action. But now we're going to be following the journey, almost like one of our artifacts once they've been lifted from site. And we're going to be heading into the finds room to hear from Freddie about how we prep our finds for specialist analysis. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Freddie.
Hi guys, and welcome to the finds room here on Lindisfarne, where we get all of our finds that are on site in here to be cleaned. If you look next to me here, we've got our tray, our tables of all these different kinds of finds, all dirty and all need a good clean. So let's have a look. At what we do. So here is the finds room. This is where everyone's busy at work cleaning all the finds. To begin with, we do what we call a dry clean, where we get all of these kind of big clumps of dirt off the finds, ready for what we call a wet clean, which you can also see over here. These have been nicely cleaned with water, and so they're ready to go to a specialist. So we keep going, we can see all different kinds of finds are being cleaned. We've got some ribs over here that Christy's working on. And then we also have a foot as well that Cindy's working on over here. That's in the dry clean stage. Yeah, and as you can see, we've got mainly human remains at the moment because it is a cemetery, so we do get that kind of thing. Lots of that kind of stuff. We've got a vertebra here, and we also have a skull over here as well. So once our finds have been cleaned, we do what we call quantification, and that's where we count and we weigh and we describe kind of the things that we've been finding. And Kendra over here is doing that. We've got all of our small finds that we've found so far, which you'll see a few more later on, but you can see that all of them need to be weighed, counted, and we've got all that techie equipment for it. So that's the finds process, and we've got all the lovely volunteers helping us with that. I thought I'd show you some of our star finds. So if you want to come over this way. So if you've been following social media, you may have seen a few of these things before, particularly these pieces here. So if I get one of them first, this here is a lovely glass bead. And it's kind of blue glass, maybe cobalt in there, and that's early medieval. We're not quite sure what period yet. It was found quite high up in one of the trenches, so it's a bit harder to date when it's in that higher soil, but that's still really nice kind of workmanship in that. Then we also have this piece, which I think is one of the most exciting things that we found. It's part of a glass gaming piece. And we know that because we've found one before. You may remember back in 2019, we found a complete gaming piece that had some white decorations, and that is the exact same on this. So this is probably the piece from the same set that we've just found 5 years later in a different part of the site, which I think is really cool. We need to find the rest to complete the set now. So that's that. And what you might not have seen, that we haven't re-put on social media, we've got coins again. So last year we had quite a few coins. I think we had 15 early medieval coins in total. We don't have that many this year, but what we do have with one of them, which I like, is possibly a new variant. So it's very hard to see in this, but we'll show you a picture later on of the center part, which has a circle and little dots on it. And that's not really been seen on coins before. So we're looking forward to kind of doing a bit more research on that and trying to figure out exactly who the coin belonged to in terms of the moneyer or the archbishop or king. And then we also have is some really exciting clench bolts. So I think Ben talked about these, and these are from shipbuilding. You can see you've got the shaft there, and then you've got your rove on top. That's that diamond-shaped headpiece, and those you really only get in shipbuilding. And we found this in a burial, and so that means that this person possibly had something to do with shipbuilding or with ships in general, that kind of context. So that's quite exciting because we've not really seen that before in Lindisfarne. It's an unusual kind of thing to have in a burial, particularly in the early medieval period, so that's exciting. And then we have some slightly larger finds, which are our namestones. Here is one of them. We got this one quite early on. It's quite hard to see, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to shine my light on it, and hopefully it picks out a little better. Hopefully you can see a bit more. It's very thinly engraved, but it's amazing that it survived this long if it's this thin with the engraving, this shallow. You can see it's quite intricate and a lot of things going on. And if we compare that to our other one that we found, which is a little smaller, but even deeper with the engraving, you can really see that kind of central cross and that rounded top with the writing on it as well. So we think we've got on this one maybe a bit of runes on top and some Old English at the bottom, which has been found on namestones before. And what is interesting on this one, it's got a little bit of an inlay, which may have held some jewels or glass maybe. So quite a really nice decorative piece. And if we compare it to that other one, you can see we still have that central cross with the rounded ends and the writing on top and a little bit at the bottom. It's harder to read this one though. And what's interesting about this one, we've got some lovely kind of lacework at the top. And we find these or similar bits of lacework in the Gospels, the Lindisfarne Gospels. So that's really nice to see. And we know that they would have been kind of a rounded top, straight sides and a flat bottom as well, because we found other pieces of them. Yeah, and so those are really kind of the main things that we've been finding in Lindisfarne, the best stuff. I hope you enjoyed this tour of the finds room. Thank you again to all of the people who've backed this project and all the volunteers here on site as well. You guys, we couldn't have done it without you, so thank you very much. And actually, I've just remembered, we do have one other thing, if you want to come over here. We have this, which is a piece of masonry that came out a few days ago. We're still letting it dry, and then we're going to clean it up a little bit. But what you can see is we've got this kind of carving on the top and on the bottom here, kind of shaping, and also this lovely kind of carving in the middle with lots of kind of things going on. We're not quite sure what they are at the moment. We'll have to clean it up and have a look. We're going to have a lot of specialists look at this. We've got possible pigment on it, so we're going to send it off for pigment analysis as well. But if you come around here, you can still see it's decorated on this side as well. Got some more kind of lacing going on. And then on this side, we've got a bit more as well. And we found this in the lime kiln or near the wall of the lime kiln. So we're not quite sure when it's from at the moment. As I said, it's pretty fresh. So we'll have to have a look at it. And then we'll let you guys know when we know.
There we go. Thank you to Freddie for that brief tour around the finds room. And so now that brings us to our Q&A section. So you've seen the finds, you've seen the dig itself. If any of you have any questions about anything that you've seen today or on the timeline over the past few days or anything about the archaeology, do feel free to ask us now. Just drop a message in the chat below. And for a brief bit of housekeeping, if you're having any trouble posting a message or viewing messages in the chat, please just refresh your browser and hopefully that should fix the issue. So just a reminder, this is for our crowdfunders and subscribers. So any of you watching the recording, if you've got any questions that you wish you could be asking right now, for our next one, don't forget that you can join our subscribers to be able to ask away anything you like. I'll give you guys a few moments to post some things in the chat. And in the meantime, I've got a few questions for David myself. So David, we saw that wonderful game piece. You spoke about it earlier and Freddie showed us it too. Can you tell me what's so exciting about finding a second game piece? What does that mean for us?
I think one of the key thing is most obviously it shows that there was once a complete set. When we just had that one fragment, it could have been, but it was a game piece which had perhaps been reused for some other purpose. It certainly had kind of all sorts of drill holes and things on the bottom, which suggested it had quite a complicated life. But getting another fragment of playing piece, and it's indisputably part of the same set because it's so similar. It shows that someone must have been on the island playing one of these games. And it's a very high status set. This isn't a set of kind of cheap bone playing pieces or anything like that. This is something which has got quite a lot of investment into it. So for us, it's apart from anything, it shows that there's some people living some quite luxurious lives here on the island.
Fabulous, thank you. And speaking of sort of quite luxurious, sort of highly decorated finds, I mean, I think one of the things we're very, very much excited about this year is that amazing crosshead that Freddie showed at the end of his tour there. Can you just tell us a bit about what's so important for that? Maybe a bit of context about crosses in general, and why is it so exciting that we found this
Well,
one this year?
yeah, these kind of big stone crosses were a really important part of the kind of the landscape of these early medieval monasteries. They kind of punctuated the space. They might have marked important points where you entered the monastery. They would have been the focus for various forms of veneration or devotion, potentially. And they form a kind of part of this amazing corpus of early medieval art. We always tend to think of things like the Lindisfarne Gospels here on the island, but there would have been all these other stone crosses, some of which have been found by previous generations on the island. But one of the exciting things about our crosshead is it's one of the very few crossheads from Britain more generally to ever have actually been found in an archaeological excavation, rather than just having been kind of always around a church or always around a village. So that's really exciting for us. And although it's only a fragment, it would have been a really substantial monument. So it probably would have been 8, 9, 10 foot high, maybe even more. The crosshead itself would have been maybe over a metre wide, probably decorated, probably painted, may have had kind of metal or glass insets into it. So these would have been really kind of amazing things and quite different from the fairly kind of muddy bit of stone we see at the moment.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can't wait to find out more about that once we've sent it away for analysis. So we do have one question in the chat here. David, could you comment on the significance of the pseudo boat burial? This question here asks, does it suggest something about the status or the culture of the person buried?
Well, these kind of burials are known from multiple sites kind of along the North Sea coast of England. There's quite a lot down in Kent, but others have kind of come up in places like Jarrow, and there's some in York and some from Lincolnshire. So they're clearly part of a kind of shared North Sea culture. Now, we don't. It's difficult to know precisely about who was buried, and obviously, once we've done work in the labs, we might be able to focus a bit more. We might know, potentially where they came from. But at this stage, it's exciting for us because it's the most northerly known example from the North Sea coast so far. As to what it means, it's difficult to say at this point. Obviously, in the North Sea world, we do get examples of whole boats being used for burials. But these seem to be just a kind of symbolic reference, perhaps, to that kind of practice. But whether it marks status or just simply that somebody came from somewhere else, we don't know. But as I said, a lot of the important work we do happens afterwards in the labs. So we'll be able to kind of report back on this in future years.
Fantastic, thank you. We have another question from the chat here about the box in Trench 2. So this question says, is it probably something as basic as a trough, as Ben noted, or is there any hint that craft work which required soaking could have occurred in that area?
And potentially there's all sorts of things it could have been used for. It could have been a simple water tank. Could have been used for some kind of food preparation. A lot of crafts do involve water. So everything from tanning to making parchment to kind of various kind of textile works. Again, I'm gonna say we're gonna find out more back in the lab. As Ben said, we've taken samples from the inside of the box, so it's we've literally got a bucket of soil or a bag of soil from there, and we can look at that much more closely. We can look at if there's any kind of microscopic residues. We can look at any kind of chemical signatures. So we've had that one there. We've had another similar box in another trench. And I do wonder whether some of the stone settings which we've got in Trench 9 might turn out to be this kind of thing. So we inevitably will need to do more work. We need to look for parallels, but it's a problem. It's an exciting problem to have at this stage.
Yeah, definitely. And you've mentioned a lot about the lab work and sort of the next steps. Obviously, we're very aware we're on year 9 of this project. Next year, our 10th year, will be our final year of excavations. And following that, we'll have all the lab work, the analysis, the report writing. How long do you think it will take for us to sort of process all that? I don't think people realize how long it can take sometimes. What do you think the timescale is going to look like?
Oh, that's as long as a bit of string. I mean, I think the important thing to say is, we don't wait until the project's completely over before we start doing the analysis. So every year we're writing stuff up, we're doing work on things, we're getting reports on the bone, we're getting all sorts of things, getting carbon-14 dates. I mean, I think realistically it's going to be 3 or 4 years, because we've got 100, we'll have over 100 skeletons which need analysis, and that's not just the physical analysis, it's doing things like the bone chemistry and maybe DNA. We could do similar things with the animal bone. All these bits of sculpture need writing up, and it takes time to put it all together. It takes time to raise the money to get funding for things like carbon-14 dates. But I'm going to optimistically say 3 or 4 years, and hopefully we'll have it all done by then.
Fantastic. So you heard that, guys. If you'd like to stay involved in the project, it doesn't just end here. There will be lots more to come over the next few years as well. A lot of post-ex information. We have 2 questions in the chat. I'm going to start with this one. So Freddie mentioned that one of the namestones included both runes and sort of an English or Latin script. Is that unusual?
Not as unusual as you might think. These are Old English runes. These aren't Viking runes. And there's a number of other namestones found in previous years which also have runes as well as Latin script. And more generally from Northumbria, we often see runes appearing on inscriptions. There's a lovely object called the Frank's casket, which is a little whalebone box which has runes and Latin text on it. There's no significance in terms of paganism. The runes are perfectly fine to be used in a Christian context. They could be used for monuments and stone, but also a couple of years ago we got a small fragment of bone comb where someone had just probably scrawled their name on it in runes as well. So I think it's an idea might be a bit difficult for us to get our head around, but at Lindisfarne, people were using day to day 2 different kinds of script to write things, both monuments and little inscriptions.
That's fascinating. Yeah, thank you. Another question we have in the chat, someone has asked about the location of the early medieval monastery and whether that would correlate with the Norman priory that's there today.
Well, certainly the Norman Priory is partly on the site of the earlier monastery, and the main church of the Anglo-Saxon monastery is probably more or less under the site of the Priory. But as I said, the early medieval monastery is very big. It would have extended under the whole village, so it would have been maybe 20 times larger than than that later Norman Priory. So what we're trying to do with our excavations is try and understand, how the spatial organisation of something this big. And what's clear, again, with our big monastic vallum is it's exciting that we've got a boundary, but crucially it's a boundary that then gets filled in. So what we're looking at is how the monastery has changed and expanded over time. So yes, while the Norman Priory is certainly on the site of some of our early medieval monastery, it's a tiny fragment compared to the much larger early medieval monastery.
Fantastic, thank you. And another question here from the chat about the alignment of the burials that were found this year, and if any of them seem to respect landscape features.
Well, as you might expect from an early medieval monastery, a Christian burial site, the overwhelming majority of our burials are head to the west, feet to the east. That respects actually some of the landscape features on the island, but this is a more general tradition which is found across kind of Europe and in Western Europe in this period. So they're fairly standard burials. Most are flat on their back, probably in shrouds, but we've got a notable number which are buried on their sides and a small number face down. So there is variations going on in those burial rites, and again, there's a lot to unpick and try and work out what influences how people were buried.
Fantastic, thank you. No more questions in the chat that I can see, but I just had one more for you, David, and that is how many days have we got left this year?
We are down to our final 2 days. We are halfway through Wednesday. The excavation finishes tomorrow at 4:30, and the backfill starts on Friday. So we're literally down in the final hours of the project, really, for this year.
Yeah, it's gone so fast, hasn't it? And I'm sure, as is the case with most archaeological digs, there'll still be plenty to come over the next sort of 24 hours. I wouldn't be surprised if we found something else pretty amazing before the end of the dig. Always the way. It's usually when you're just about to pack up, the biggest thing comes out. So do keep watching the timeline. I'm sure there is more to come. So I think we're through with questions from the chat. So without further ado, I'll say a quick thank you to David for joining us today and for sharing your knowledge. It's been really great to hear from you. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. And last but not least, I'll do a quick outro before we let you get on with your Wednesday lunchtime. So do feel free to follow us on our website, on our social media, and keep up to date with the digs. All of you guys that are watching live will be receiving the rest of the updates from Lindisfarne as we wrap up the dig as well. And do keep a good eye on the timeline to see if there's any new and exciting finds that might come out in those last 48 hours. You can see the dig timeline there along the bottom of the screen if you'd like to go and have a look today. And of course, for anyone who's watching our recording, as we've said, if you'd like to join us live for these events and you'd like to be able to ask questions and chat with the archaeologists and also support the work that we do across the UK and beyond, you are more than welcome to join us as a subscriber and join the DV family and just support everything we do. We're very, very grateful for all of our crowdfunders and all of our subscribers who have made this event and future events possible. So thank you so much to everyone who's been here live today, and thank you everyone who's catching the recording as well. Without further ado, we'll say goodbye and we'll head back to the dig site ourselves. I hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday, and we'll see you next time. Bye everyone.